Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to view Never Back Down. Because we, of course, had Djimon that goes to play Jean Rocqua in this movie. And Jean goes on in one of these training sessions and it's to shout out the word, Never Back Down. You would have thought like somebody would have like fallen off a rope, or like the bench press would all of a sudden be like, oh my god, a spotter, help. But and that would have been like a comic relief thing, but we didn't go there. We didn't go into the joke of the movie. But so for this, I think there's like one line that I think really sells the film, and that is a quote that Ryan states, and I'm gonna try to do it the best I can, where Ryan ends up stating, it's like, well, yeah, like that's all the American pie, but like now it's time to go on and see what we're really here for, which is to be the action. So we're getting kind of like a if everybody's to remember like the American Pie movies, like we're getting a lot of that in one party, with these two women sharing a tub, and we get to see women in bikinis, like a ton of them. And then we, of course, go on and show a lot of different varieties of fighting in this film, which I think kind of stands out because normally in every other fighting film, we just have like two guys and like, okay, all right, like we're going to fight throughout this whole entire film. And then we're going to have like this rubber match or this grudge match that finally is to like sink in that, okay, we're never going to fight again kind of thing. A lot of this probably does feel like the movie like Rocky 2 a lot, or maybe it's whichever Rocky it is that Apollo Creed goes on and trains Rocky, the one where they're kind of both running in the sands together. Like that's the one. Maybe it's the Mr. T Rocky, but either way, it kind of feels like a Rocky film either way. So yeah, so I think for the first time around, I think this movie could easily sell a lot of people, especially if they like a lot of fighting, a pretty decent story, because we have characters that are just very aggressive, fighting or not fighting, so I think that's really good. If someone was to have gone on and watched this like a couple times and was like, oh yeah, like I remember this movie, let's come back to it. Which honestly today I had to wait a while to be able to like review this movie, because I had a review that was supposed to come out, but it just took forever for whatever reason. So I had to watch this a couple of times, and the more and more I watch it, I'm like, man, Amber Heard at some points is to just like the longer and longer she's on screen, the more like cardboardy a performance that she delivers. But again, this is probably one of her early roles, so I guess we can cut her some slack. But again, like, we can also state that who knows if she's really learned anything over time while continuing to act, for whatever reason. But I think the one scene where she is telling Tyler, it's like, Tyler, get up! And I'm like, dude, like, that is such like a cardboardy thing, but I get it. Like being upset or being like sad in a movie like is hard to pull off, but still, like I just thought it was such like a cardboard performance. But still, anyways, regardless of that, I feel that overall, like I like this movie. Really liked Djimon, who's playing Jean Rocqua in this movie. And so, what is this film about? So we have Jake that is to be easily triggered into a fight, it seems. Because Jake had gone on to lose his dad via a car accident. And it seems that when Jake is to get triggered into a fight, all anyone has to do is just say, hey, Jake, yeah, you had a dad, right? And they're like, and Jake's like, what did you say? What? Huh? Huh? Pa! What'd you say about my dad? Like, it's kind of like Marty McFly in the Back to the Future movie, where all of a sudden Marty is to be called Yella by somebody, and then Marty's like, "What did you call me?" And they're like, "I called you Yella." And Marty's just like, "Well, okay, like you're Ron." And then like Dr. Brown is like, "Marty, your kids." Because that's all he says in every Back to the Future movie. Dr. Brown is only concerned about Marty's kids, and that's it. That's all he says in all the movies. Even in the first Back to the Future, when he barely knows Marty, he's like, "Marty, your kids." Anyways, that's the Back to the Future joke that I always have. So, but pushing on, so Jake has a short fuse, and Jake is to have to go on and move to another town for probably the first time ever. It actually has nothing to do with Jake. So, come to find out, Jake's younger brother Charlie is to have this scholarship because he is a genius kid, it seems. And so Jake then goes on to go to this other school, and it seems that all of a sudden Jake or Tyler is quickly getting some buzz via him going on and fighting, of course, in this football field. So everybody's like, "Oh yeah, like that's the guy who fights people." And Ryan is just like, "Well, but I'm the guy that fights people. I'm that guy. Like he's taking that away from me." So Ryan now has to go on and face Jake, a Jake who seems to be only skilled at putting up his dukes because he is just a boxer skilled man. So, and you would think that Jake would just get lucky anyways, because that would be just life, but, or the luck or the randomness of things, but no. So, come to find out, when Jake ends up getting tuned up, let's just say, Jake then realizes, he's like, "Well, like, I should really up my game, up my skill, and go on with Max Cooperman, who is played by Evan Peters in this movie." And I think Max is the only person that is to continue from this movie and go on into being in other films. Everyone else just kind of goes their own, like, "Oh no, like, I made a lot of money off this one movie, I don't need to come back." And then they have like Michael J. White and the other films, and it kind of becomes, I feel, like a very Michael J. White focused movie. But anyways, so that just is because, like, somebody needs to be getting some sweet cheddar for those films, so it has to be somebody. Anyways, pushing on. So we have Jake that is to learn from Jean Rocqua, and is to like really show how aggressive he is, how he's really like going like full contact every single time, to the point where Jean is starting to realize, or Jaimin is really realizing from Jake, that's, well, hey, like, you're trying so hard to hurt me, like you're hurting yourself. Like, what are you doing? Like, cool down. Like you need some time to just like get away, because otherwise you're gonna just hurt people or hurt yourself and go. So, but the interesting thing is, the more Jake goes and trains with Rocqua, he realizes that he's starting to see this as like therapeutic. He's starting to see this as a way for him to get rid of all this anger. And we kind of have this be similar to the Tom Hardy Warriors movie, where we have the trainer that goes on and has people listen to like classical music, because instead of like listening to like Metallica and all kinds of stuff, instead he introduces classical music into MMA to kind of really just teach the people rhythm and kind of like footing and stuff like that to the beats of the song. And but so you're still not going to go on and get this really aggressive music that is kind of forcing these people to become aggressive because of the music. So, like, music can go on and be able to kind of manipulate people in a way. It's kind of weird. So, with that said, when Jake finally goes on and is to get this therapeutic release, Jake then realizes, like, well, like, you know what? Like, I feel like I have the girl I want. I feel like I have the life I want. I don't need to fight Ryan. F that guy. And Ryan is just like, oh, like, you don't want to fight me now? I thought we were, like, building up this date in our calendars together simultaneously, that we were just gonna want to just fight one another. But oh no, Jake, you could care less, so I'm gonna make you care. And so Ryan gets at Jake the only way that Ryan really can. And so Jake has to go on and fight Ryan in this big, like, parking lot brawl to then finally, like, crown who is the better of the two. And by the end of this movie, we end up having both of them. They're just like, and it's like, like, all right, it seems that there is some, like, status quo, some kind of something just set up here to where it seems that both of them are now fine, and they know who the champ is, so to speak, so they're fine with it. So that goes on and leads to a sequel that doesn't tie into any of this story, and it just does a whole new thing. And we also have at some point where Michael J. White ends up going on and making fun of what Jean Rocquois' character would do by taking this heavy bag and kicking it really hard to where the heavy bag kind of like swings to this other side. And Michael J. White is like, huh? Like, that's really what this guy taught you? And so Michael J. White goes on and is impacting this this sandbag thing like so badly that it like destroys and like it's like the sand just comes out of this this bag. And Michael J. White is like, well, hey, I'm here to teach you that. Like, kick a heavy bag all you want. I'm going to tell you how to destroy one. So they're like, oh, like he's coming in and trying to humiliate the last teacher. Fine. Because he has to be the guy that is to be in a number of other films. So that is what it is. So let's go on into the double 5 time territory. Let's go into spoilers, because I've already been talking about this movie for long enough. Let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil this movie. So in the very beginning of the film, we of course have Jake, who's on the football field, on the gridiron. And so Jake, of course, is playing defense. I think he's playing a defensive back. And so when the offense is to be set, we have Jake on defense, who is tackling whoever. It seems that they're not doing great on the opposite of Jake's team. So we have the coach who's like, hey, get that 44 guy. Get him. So the player ends up going out there and is trying to goad out Jake to try and get rid of him, to try and eject him, to do something. So Jake is not really like paying him any attention. He's just like, well, hey man, look at the scoreboard, like you're losing. So we just get to a point where the other player goes on and finally says to Jake, it's like, well, hey, like, it's too bad about your dad. Like, the sauce, that'll kill you. And Jake's like, what did you just say? What? What? As he's grabbing the helmet, as we see the visual here in this movie. And so we then have these two players get into a fight. Jake is taking a lot of these players on, just tackling them and taking them down and slugging them. even with helmets on, just slugging them in the face or whatever, knocking them all down. So we then have like both the teams who just get into this fight. They're like, hey, purr, 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 purr. I'm winning, maybe. So we then have Jake, who, after the game is all done, we have his friend who ends up stating to him, it's like, well, hey, like, I guess you had to leave with a bang now, didn't you? And Jake is just like, well, like, it's just me. So we have his friend that states to Jake, it's like, well, it's too bad, like, I'm never going to go on and go to Orlando because, like, why would I want to go there? Like, if I wanted to go to Disney World or Disneyland or whatever, like, I'd be 8. So, but Jake's friend does go on and say it. It's like, well, hey, like, maybe during spring break, I'll go down there anyways. And Jake is like, well, that sounds great. And so we have Jake's friend that states, it's like, well, like, good, maybe I can get you out of trouble. And Jake is like, well, maybe I can get you in some. And so they kind of walk off. So Jake then goes on to go home to have kind of bandages over his eye, or around his eye. And we, of course, have Jake's ma, who is Margaret. Margaret? Margaret? Let's go with Margaret. Margaret? Let's go with Tyler. That works. We have Margaret. Who talks to Jake, and of course, she... I can't get over the Margaret thing. Margaret? Let's go with Margaret. I don't know. I don't know how it's pronounced. Nobody ever says it. So, Margaret says to Jake that she is to realize, it's like, oh, like, I've heard you've been fighting again from your school. And Jake is like, well, yeah, what does it matter, though? Like, we're moving. Who cares? So we go on to have Charlie, who's talking to Jake, and they're going on and they're trying to pack things up. We're also having Jake's mother, who's telling him, hey, pack things up. So, like, at least he can do that. So Jake is talking to Charlie, and Charlie's like, well, hey, like, you don't hate me, do you, for having us leave here? And Jake is like, no. Like, when really thinking about it, I'm sure since Jake has moved around so often, Jake could care less. So Charlie's just like, well, okay, all right. Like, I just wanted to know. Because, of course, Charlie getting this scholarship because he's so much of a genius that I guess he's already going to college because he's Wonder Kid. And Charlie's going on and doing tennis, and things are going well. So we have Jake and we have Charlie, who are going on and just kind of driving around and doing all kinds of stuff. So we then have them go on to Orlando. So we just have Jake, who couldn't be bothered to unpack any of his stuff. He just leaves all the boxes in his room because he's like, well, it's only going to be a matter of time before, like, I'm not going to be sticking around much longer anyways. But so, come to find out, Jake gives us a story somewhere in this movie about what had happened to his dad. So, come to find out, Jake had went with his dad to the bar, and his dad had gotten really drunk. And so what happened was that Jake didn't go on and, like, drive the car. He let his dad drive the car. And so, like, that's Jake's biggest regret, as come to find out, Jake's dad was to go on and wrap this car around this tree, and Jake's dad died. But somehow Jake lived. So we even have at one point where I think they end up having to like state the thing of like, well, hey, like, wouldn't you have rather have me died instead of him, and all this kind of goofy crap that they always have to go with all these kind of like things and scenarios and whatever. But it is what it is. So Jake goes to this other school, and he so much distanced himself from everyone to the point of him going to these bleachers and eating this apple. And we have Jake that goes on after his lunch is over. He then sees a group of people all circling around two guys, and they're fighting. And Jake is to try to break it up of like, hey, what's going on here? And Jake goes on and does some slugging of himself. And we immediately have Max, who becomes Tyler's best friend in this movie, who's like, hey man, like it's okay, like I can take care of it. And Ryan ends up telling Jake, it's like, yeah, he can take care of it. And Jake is like, well, I guess so. And so Jake just walks away, lets Max continue to get the crap beat out of him. And so that ends up turning around to have Jake go on and start to have Max as a best friend, and Jake starts to become popular. So, as Max is to state it. So, Max goes actually into lunchroom to eat his meal and whatever and do some things. And Max goes on to state to Jake, it's like, hey man, like, you're becoming really popular. The word's getting around that a football player in Utah is like, or it's either Iowa or what state was it? I don't remember. I'm gonna mess it up. So Max states that the one other football team player is happy that Jake was to have left his town so he can go on and be the hero of this team. And so Jake is like, yeah, and so Max is to try to go on and tell Jake that that fight that he was having was a sanctioned fight. And Max has gone on to get training by, of course, Jean Roquois. And so Max is saying to Jake, it's like, well, it seems that when you like did that right hook, like you did some studying, like you did your research. And so like Jake is trying to get, or Max is trying to get Jake to like go on to study with this guy who can give Jake even more kung fu fighting information. Kung fu fighting information. Anyways, so Jake is to go on and be like, no. So whenever Max tries to go on and continue to bring this up, Jake is not really interested, but we'll get there. So it seems that Ryan goes on and finds both Max and Jake seemingly being friends. So we have Baja that is to meet up with Jake in one of these classes, and we have this English teacher that is going on and like talking about this certain passage and goes to Baja, and Baja blanks. We have Jake who ends up going on and is to give the answer and is to give a thorough, in-depth answer. And the teacher is like, wow, kids, like a guy that just comes out of here from nowhere seems to have gone on and done a lot more studying than any of you. So like this kid that just comes out of nowhere knows everything. So Baha then goes to Jake and is to kind of rag on him for knowing that answer and kind of saving Baha from having to figure something out. So we have the introductions between Jake Tyler and Baha Miller, and we have Jake who's like, your name is Baha, and she's like, yeah, like my family just was really into weird names. So we have Jake and we have Baha bumping into one another again, as we of course go on to have Baha invite Jake to this party that Ryan is throwing. Come to find out, Baha is only going on and inviting Jake to this party, having Jake thinking that Baha and him are going to end up together, but instead, Baha is suckering him in to have Jake fight Ryan. And Jake ends up getting kind of really sour about that and really just like, well, hey, like you baited me and it worked. And Baha's like, well, yeah, but can you forgive me? And Jake's just like, But anyways, let's get to the party. So Jake and Max make their way to this party, and we have at one point where two girls are in this tub, and they are, of course, are topless. And we have Max, who's just like, oh my god, like, this is gonna go well on my YouTube channel. Yeah, woohoo! So we all of a sudden have the girls who are very offended that that Jake is to go on and do this. So they are to stop what they're doing and getting out of the tub. We have a number of red cups that come flinging at both Jake and both Max, and they're like, sorry. So they leave. So Jake and Max bump into Ryan, and Ryan's like, hey, yeah, like the guys that I've been looking for. Great. So Ryan goes on and explains kind of the lay of the land for, of course, Orlando. So Ryan is to state, like, yeah, we have all these women here. They're all in bikinis. Yeah, that's nice and all. A very American Pie-like thing. But now let's go on and get to the real reason why we're here. And we just see, like, three different circles of three different groups of people. And so Ryan is to state that they go on and they control all these fights. And so we have some kind of race fight that's going on. We have a girl on girl fight, and then we have two exes fighting one another for whatever reason. There was never really a story for that. So Jake goes on to talk to Ryan. It's like, well, hey, like, who ends up sanctioning these fights? And Ryan's like, well, like, we do. So, but Ryan is now going to set everybody up for the main event, as Ryan, it seems, has gone on to have a extra pair of fight shorts under his regular ones. So Ryan is getting his gear on, and Jake's like, I'm not going to fight you. And Ryan's like, yeah, you are. Like, that's what you came here for, right? And then Jake looks at Baha, and Ryan looks at Baha, and he's like, oh, you came here for other motivations. Oh, I see. So Ryan goes on and kisses Baha, and then Ryan's like, guess what? You were suckered. So Jake's like, you know what? I have no interest in fighting you. And Max is just like, well, yeah, I don't think he has any real reason to fight you, Ryan. And then so Ryan is like, well, hey, man, I saw your clip. I saw your video online, and it seems like you got some skill. But is it also true about your dad and how he was to go on and wrap around that tree? And man, you should have been driving that car instead of your drunk father. And then that's when Jake goes off, and he's like, give me the gloves. So they go into fighting, and so we have Ryan who's fighting Jake, and so Jake is just fighting him in a boxer-like style. And Ryan's like, okay, like, you have a really good, like, right hook, and it seems like you're pretty skilled, but here's the thing. Ryan then goes on and kicks Jake like right in the back of the leg, which is a really like painful spot, especially if you can kick really powerful. So Jake gets kicked in the leg, and Ryan's like, "Yeah, I bet that really hurts." And so he goes on to kick him again because, of course, Jake doesn't have a defense for that because he doesn't know, but he'll know that somewhere later on in the film, which is great. So we get that kind of second thing where it's like Ryan tries the same thing twice, but Jake now has a counter for it because he puts up his leg, and in a knee like fashion, or like in a kind of like a kind of like puts up his knee and then just blocks it with his bone, with his leg bone. So there was a counter to that. So Ryan starts to go on and start pounding away at Jake. And so Ryan's like, "Yeah, you're gonna go down like a little bit. Uh, it's like, sorry, that's just how things are." And so when Jake ends up getting knocked down, he then gets back up, and Max is like, "What are you doing? Go down! You're gonna die! Don't you know that? You're gonna die!" That's not what he says, but I'm just remembering the movie Lionheart with Jean Claude, where like the guy is like, "You can't win, don't you know that you can't win," or something like that at the end of the fighting. I don't remember what he shouts out, but he says something like that. So, we have Jake that continues to get back up to where now Ryan has to kick him really hard in the face, and Ryan kicks him so hard that Jake has had this like kind of face on him, and he goes down for the count. So Max drags him off to Jake's home where he drops him off. Max ends up saying something about cockroaches and a number of other things that it's like, "Hey man, I'm going to take care of you." And Jake is like, "What's going on? I'm confused." So Max takes care of him, and so Jake is to wake up the next day or wake up the next morning, and his ribs hurt. His like bits and parts of his body are just like messed up, bloodied face. So Charlie ends up coming into Jake's room and is saying like, "Well, hey, like how was the other guy?" And Jake is like I think he looked pretty bad like before the fight, but maybe not after it. So Charlie's asking like Jake here, it's like, "Well, hey, like are you gonna go to school?" And Jake is like, "No. Like, can you find the bus?" And Charlie's like, "Oh, you mean that yellow thing? Yeah, I think I got it." And so Jake is like, "Oh, good man," because Jake is gonna go and ice his body for the whole entire day, as when he's going on and walking around with possibly bruised ribs, and more than likely, yeah, that's gonna hurt like heck. We have Jake that is to again have Max appear at his home, and this time he brings a DVD to Jake. And so Max is now again telling Jake about the guy that he trains with, and here's this DVD, here you go. And Jake is like, "Well, I'm not really into that UFC stuff." And Max is like, "Well, that's obvious by how you were fighting. That you couldn't adapt, so you almost died." So Max goes on, is like, here's the disc. Take it, watch this. Do it. Do the thing that I'm telling you to do. So Jake watches the video, and I guess the address of this place is like plastered all over the place in the video. And so when Jake finally makes his way to this gym so he can get a jump on the weekend or whatever goofy thing that he stated to Max. Jake goes on to this gym, and so Max is like, all right, you came. And Jake is like, well, yeah, like the address of that video was kind of hard to miss. So Max and Jake go in there, and so Jake ends up talking to Jean Roquois as he used to yell, never back down. And so Max goes on and tells Roquois that this is Jake Tyler, and immediately all that Jean sees on this guy's face is just this wound here, wound here, wound here. And so Roquois immediately tells Jake, it's like, well, hey, like, if you're coming in here for a certain reason, like, those kind of people don't last very long. And Tyler's like, well, like, I smacked into a door. And Roquois is like, well, that must have been a really big door. So we have Jake that's stating, like, well, like, how about I come into your session right now? I kind of prove to you that I can do whatever you need me to do. And Roquois is like, this is for, like, experienced people. Like, you can go on with Max into the beginner part of it. And Jake is like, well, no, I'm a really good learner. And so Roquois is like, okay, like, go in there, jump in there, do this. And so we have Max who's kind of telling Jake what all to do for all these things. He's like, climb the rope, like, pull this thing up, do this, like, bench press, come on. So Jake is trying to learn all of these things in a hurry. And it seems that by the end of this, it seems that Roquois seems to have been won over by Jake. To the point where it's like, okay, like, all right, like, you can stick around, but yeah, like when eventually we're gonna have Jake need to actually, like, learn some of the submissions or just some techniques or whatever, like, Jake is gonna have to figure out how to learn quickly, or to have Roquois kind of take him under the wing and kind of really try and like, kind of work some mistakes that, of course, Jake tends to make. So we have Tyler that goes on to give Roquois like 2 months of training money, and Roquois is saying to Jake, it's like, well, do you think it's worth it? Like, do you think you're going to stay for those 2 months and not fight anybody? And Jake is like, yeah, I think that this is worth it. And Roquois is like, okay, all right. So Jake goes home, and so Margaret is now asking Jake when he comes home, it's like, well, hey, like, why is there money missing out of your bank account? And Jake is like, I don't want to explain it. And Margaret's like, why is money missing? And so Jake shows Margaret the fighting gloves, and so Margaret's like, no, like, I know. So Margaret goes on to even talk to Roquois in a part of this movie, and so Margaret tells Roquois, it's like, well, hey, like, so you're taking, like, money from my kid and you're beating him up. And Roquois is just like, well, hey, like, I go on and take these people who become really angry, and by the time that they leave here, they're much less angry. That's why I take people and I bring them in here. And so Margaret ends up going on and like, well, hey, here's like another month's pay for him to be here. So yeah, so you can really like guide my son, because of course Jake no longer has a father figure, and maybe Roquois can somehow be that for him somehow. So we have Jake that goes on and starts getting training, and we have one day where Jake goes on and is to take on a guy that is obviously smaller than him, but we of course have Rocqua who's like, well, like, just take it easy on the guy. And so it winds up that Jake ends up continuing to just get submission after submission, like armbarred and rear naked choked. And so Jake is supposed to tap, and when he gets into the choke, he doesn't, and he passes out. So we have Rocqua who is trying to kind of showcase Jake how to fight. And the first thing that Rocqua really trains him on how to do is how to breathe while he fights. While every time he punches and he kicks, he needs to and breathe while he punches and fights every single time. And so we have Jake that turns to Rocqua and it's like, that's the grasshopper speech that you have for me, is just to not sand the floor and paint the fence and wax on, wax off. You're just giving me breathing. And Rocqua is like, shut up. But also, Jake is to realize that Rocqua lives in his gym, hence why he's always there. And so we have Jake that goes on and gets there an hour early before everybody, so that way he can go on and be able to learn something from Rocqua before everyone else does, and that's when he learns how to breathe while he fights. So Jake goes on to continue to learn, but he still has that anger. He's still aggressive. So we have at one point where Rocqua and Tyler are sparring, and Jake starts to become more angry with his punches, to where Rocqua is just like, hey, like, slow down, like. And so when Jake is telling Rocqua here, it's like, well, that's not how I do things. And then so Rocqua is like, okay, show me how you do things. And so both of them start fighting, and Rocqua is obviously getting the better of Jake because Rocqua can just counter everything. So we have Rocqua that tells Jake, it's like, okay, like, get out of here, cool things down, leave. So both Max and Jake leave, and immediately Jake leaves to find just somebody that he can fight, somebody that he can punch. And Jake goes on to find these guys who are honking their horns, so much so that Jake gets out of his car. So Jake gets out of his car, Max films this, and so Jake is fighting a number of guys and kind of flinging them through this side mirror, going on and really taking all these guys down. And so now Max is showing off this footage onto his channel. Everybody's like, oh my god, like, Jake, oh wow. So Jake and Max are becoming really popular, to the point of one of the girls asking Max, is like, well, do you know Jake? Is he your friend? And Max is like, well, our relationship is actually very professional. I'm his trainer. And so we all of a sudden have Baja, who turns to Jake. It's like, well, I guess you're a rock star now. And Jake turns to Baja and it's like, well, what does that matter to you? Because, like, you're not with me. Like, you're not trying to get with me, even though you might be. And I'm just not wanting to forgive you for what you had done before. We even have at one point where Baja, like, goes to Jake's place and is to try to apologize. And Jake is just like, no, like, I'm not going to forgive you. Nope. Like, and we even have Charlie that's telling Jake, it's like, whatever she did, forgive her. Because some of that. You know what I'm saying? So, we just finally get to a point where Jake finally goes on to tell Baja, because Baja can only grovel for so long. And we finally have Ryan that is having one of his friends kind of tell him, it's like, well, it seems that Jake has a new groupie now, and it's your girl. So Baja breaks it off with Ryan, because Baja is to realize that Jake is to just always want to fight, and Baja also realizes that what Ryan did to Jake was awful, yada yada yada. So Ryan is telling Baja, it's like, well, hey, like, you were a ghost in this school, like, no one cared about you, like, I made you popular, like, I made you who you are. And even Baja states that it's like, well, yeah, like, she even states that to Jake, that it's like, well, like, I was to go on and easily like find Ryan and just became uh like popular, and like everything just came so easy to me. And Jake is like, oh, so like I have to feel bad for you because everything just became so easy for you. You just became popular, and so I have to throw you a bone. Where? Where? Anyways, so Baja breaks it off with Ryan, and so it seems that at the perfect time, Jake is to then forgive Baja. And it seems that finally both Baja and Jake can become a couple now, and they are going on and wrestling in a room where Baja is to be wearing Jake's gloves. Be like, hey, what's my technique? And Jake is like, well, actually, your stance is pretty good. Your this is pretty good. And Baja is like, well, yeah, like I have a bunch of brothers, and we all share one bathroom, so so they go in and they talk about submissions, and so they're talking about tapping, and so Baja tells the Jake, it's like, well, are you gonna tap? And Jake ends up going on and putting his hand over Baja's badonkadonk and does a little bit of a tap there. It's like, well, of course, that makes the most sense. So, and then Charlie kind of budges in, like, hey, what's going on? And we then all of a sudden have them going on and like, oh, we were wrestling. And Charlie tells Baja, he's like, I'm a big fan of wrestling. And then bizarrely in the background of one other scene, I think when Jake is to need to go on and maybe talk to Max or somebody, we have Charlie making the joke about wrestling again to Baja. And and you can hear that in the background. So we have Jake that ends up going back to Rocroi, and Rocroi sees the damage to Jake's knuckles, and he's like, no, like, what are you doing? Like, I told you, if you fought again, you're out of here. So one strike, you're out. So Jake leaves, and so Max is with the goal of like, well, hey, like, if Jake's not going back to the gym, I'm not going to the gym. So we need to figure out some way to like sneak you in there so we get some secret training in. And Jake is like, well, we can't do that. He's there all the time. So finally, Jake just follows Rocroi into this grocery store. And so Jake is finally tell Rocroi about his dad, about his father, what happened. And the only time that he can feel like better about his life is when Jake is in there being trained by Rocroi. And like Rocroi just sees that and he's like, okay, like, be at the gym tomorrow. and no excuses. So Jake goes to the gym and continues to keep getting trained on how to do like takedowns and start to do submissions, how to do like triangle chokes and all kinds of things, so we can learn all that stuff. Uh, Learning how to go on and run alongside Rocqua, and finally at one point we have Jake who beats Rocqua, and so now Jake is like, okay, since I beat you, you have to tell me a story. Like, why is it that you've just been by yourself for so long? So Rocqua finally gives Jake this story about him and his brother, who his brother was to be a really good fighter, even better than Rocqua could be. So Rocqua was to have him and his brother be at this bar, and one guy in the bar wanted to fight Rocqua's brother. So Rocqua's brother thought nothing of it, but we had Rocqua here that wanted to kind of smack this guy around to teach him a lesson, and because this guy just really wanted to fight a pro for some goofy reason. So they let it go, and come to find out, they turn around and end up getting shot by this guy, Rocqua's brother. So Rocqua ends up stating to Jake that he has never been home since. It's like, well, why can't you go back home? Like, see your dad. Like, maybe he'll forgive you. Maybe maybe like all things will be well again. And Rocqua is like, well, my dad last told me the last time I saw him, as we now have Rocqua who has a tear down his face. He's like, my father told me that both brothers had died that night, or both his sons had died that night. So, dang it, I messed that up. I messed that up, that good line. So Jake is just like, well, like, just see him anyways. Just go on. Just leave. Just see your dad. So, because all this is really building up to, like, Rocqua is stating that you can counter from anything. And so, by the end of the movie, we finally have Jake that is kind of stating to Rocqua, it's like, well, like, what about you? Like, why aren't you countering from everything? Like, if you can state that you can counter from, like, you need to counter from your own life. You need to counter to make amends with your dad. Like, you need to go off and you need to counter. Like, you're telling me you need to do it. You need to follow your own philosophy or your own, like, thing that you can kind of counter. So, counter. So, because we have Jake that goes on and training is going well, surprisingly well. So now we, of course, have Ryan, who is to find out about the video about all the guys that Jake had beaten up with that Hummer and the whatever. So Ryan goes on and takes Jake in his bathroom and is to kind of sweep the leg, dropping Ryan, and then Ryan puts his foot over Jake's neck and is like, you know what, I can hurt you right now if I really wanted to, but I'm not. And because it'd be too easy. And so Ryan is telling Jake, it's like, how about you go to the beatdown? And then Jake ends up asking Ryan, it's like, what is a beatdown? Max is like, oh. he just had that big O moment, and Ryan didn't even note it. So Max goes on and says that it's a tournament, and so it seems that people don't really get the text about this tournament until the night of where it is, and so on and so forth. So, like, it's a whole, like, secret fighting thing, so that way we could, of course, kind of, like, get away with doing this at some environment. So it's kind of like a karate tournament, but like a very much underground one. So, an MMA. So, anyways, we then have Jake, who after hearing about the beatdown and kind of marking it on his calendar, all of a sudden, like, Jake and Baja are doing so well, and we have Jake who is to kind of hang out with uh like Charlie, and everything seems to go swimmingly. So we have Jake who tells Max, is like, dude, I don't even want to go to the beatdown. Like, I don't even want to fight Ryan because that's what he wants. Like I don't want to give in to something that he wants. Like, I'm realizing now that I'm better than that. So Ryan then hears that Jake is not interested in the beatdown, so Ryan makes Jake interested. So one time when Max is coming from a training session, Ryan picks Max up. And Ryan's like, hey man, like, it seems like you're getting some pretty good skills from off this guy. How about you, like, come and just kind of show off your skills? Wouldn't that be great? And Max is just like, okay, yeah, that sounds fun. And Raquel is looking on, and Max is like, hey, no, don't do that. No. Like, this guy. So Max goes on and leaves, not hearing a word that Raquel is saying. So Max goes to Ryan's place, and so we have, of course, Max that is going on and telling the guys, like, how to punch the right way, because they need to breathe and punch. They need to kick and breathe. So the guys are like, well, yeah, like, how about you tone it down there, Sensei, because you're just here so that way you can get beaten up. And Max is like, what? And Ryan's like, yeah. So Max ends up getting beaten up, just hit and punched, and almost to near death. So we have Max that ends up just getting dumped off to now have Jake, who's like grabbing onto Max, is like, hey, we need to go to the hospital. Like, Max is in a really bad way. So finally we just have Jake, who's turning to Baja Blast. She's a Mountain Dew flavor. And so Jake is saying, I need to go on and fight Ryan. Like, this will never end. So, like, I need to teach this guy a lesson that he needs to stop. So Jake also is to go on to Raquel and talk to Raquel about the beatdown. And Raquel is like, well, hey, if you leave here, I'll never train you again. And come to find out, after this movie's over, Raquel is going to leave and you're never going to see him again. Because he won't be in the other films. So Jake ends up telling Raquel, it's like, well, hey, like, if anything, like, this one guy is just beating me down, and so, like, I just feel so upset and just so angry, and so, yeah, so Jake is going on and telling Raquel, it's like, well, then why did I come here to have you train me to not go on and do, like, the one fight that just seems like the most right to do? And Raquel is like, no, you're still fighting, like I told you. So Jake is like, well, like, okay then. Like, then I'm just gonna leave and I'm gonna have to do this fight. And but, like, it's the right decision. Like, it's the obvious decision. So Jake goes off to the beatdown, and Raquel just, after Jake leaves, he's like, well, I just need to go on and just, like, close all my doors and go off and see my dad. Because that's the fight that I need to take. And, like, Raquel just leaves. So we have Jake that goes to the beatdown, and there's a lot of fighting that goes on. I'm not going to remember a lot of the fighters, because of course I don't think they're clearly stated in IMDb all that well, and plus also like I tried to look for like the fighting list in this movie and I couldn't see it really coming up anywhere. So I was like, okay, well that sucks. Um, but so there's quite a few times where there is some interesting rounds. Uh, there is some pretty good like Ryan rounds where Ryan goes on to have this one guy that is kind of doing all this like dance fighting, and he like stands on one hand upside down and he's like, yeah, look at me, yeah, I'm doing all this flippy crap. And so Ryan comes in and he like Superman punches the guy and knocks him out. So it's kind of like the Indiana Jones thing where the guy like gets the blade and flings the blade, and then by the time the guy is like flinging the blade, Harrison Ford just goes on and shoots him, and then the guy falls over. It's like, what the fuck? Evidently, the guy who is doing that whole sword act thing, and Harrison Ford shoots him in that movie, that guy was ticked because, like, well, hey, like I didn't see it coming. Like, I didn't know when he was going to shoot the gun. It's like, well, that was the whole joke of it all. But anyways, so that guy was ticked. So we also had Ryan who goes through one of these bouts, and one of the other guys was really defenseless. So Ryan goes on to like finger in the eye and just like or thumb in the eye. He's like, yeah, I'm gonna get you. And so Ryan ends up going on to be disqualified from that fight because of finger in the eye, or the thumb in the eye. So Jake goes on and does his fights, and so Jake at some point ends up going on and possibly breaking one of his ribs, and Jake is going like, oh, I am probably gonna go on and need to stop fighting. But we even have the referee that kind of comes into this room that Jake is in while he's trying to ice down his ribs. And this referee is just like, hey, like, you can continue to fight, right? And Jake is like, yeah, I'm fine. And so Baja goes back into the back, and Jake is like, hey, like I'm fine, like I'll be out there. And Baja's like, oh, okay, like a little hostility. And so like Jake just needed like the one person to really kind of help him out here. But Baja is also telling Jake, is like, dude, you look like crap. And Jake is like, well, like that's probably a nice word to crap because I look worse than that. So Baja's like, you shouldn't fight anymore. And Jake is like, well, I'm only needing to fight one person, and that's it. Like this whole thing was to just fight one person, and that of course is Ryan. And they even ended up calling Jake and Ryan up to have them both fight one another, but then they realized, oh yeah, I'm sorry, like we stated another name instead. Instead of Tyler, it's Taylor. Oh, my bad. And it's like, don't even think that we're gonna get that crap. Like, no, like just don't even tease. Come on now. But so since Jake had qualified, but now Ryan has disqualified, Jake goes into another match for the finale, or for the semifinals, and Jake just looks at the mat and he just taps on the mat and leaves. He's like, well, like Ryan isn't gonna be a guy that I was gonna fight, so I'm not gonna fight this match. So the DJ, the host guy, is all ticked. He's like, well, wait a minute, like we're gonna have two nobody fighters, and like I don't want this match. Like these guys sound like two lawyers fighting. No, like the one match that we should have had, we didn't get. So this guy is ticked. So Jake and Ryan go out to the parking lot, and so eventually we have everybody inside the club who realizes that the real fight is outside, not in between these two guys, and so everybody just runs off. So everyone goes outside to see both Jake and Ryan fighting. And we have Ryan's crew that is telling Ryan, like, hey man, go for the ribs. Like, he's hurt, go for the ribs. Go for the McRib. Do it. It's juicy, it's succulent. Go for the McRib. So, Ryan is trying his dangdest to go on and try to kick Jake, and Jake counters everything that Ryan tried to do in the early part of the film. Jake seemingly comes up with a counter. We even have Jake who tries to do a triangle hold, and Ryan tries to counter to slam him onto this car and slam him onto this concrete. And so we continue to have both Jake and Ryan just duking it out, to the point of course, having Ryan get to that one secret weapon of his, which is that kick, then ends up going on and taking the heavy bag and have it go flying in the other direction, which Jake gets that training, has conquered that level of expertise with his legs. And so you would think that for a third of this movie, Jake would just be walking around like, I can't frickin' walk. You would think that like Jake would just be like, I'm a Frankenstein the whole film. But so Jake instead goes on and is to do the one kick to Ryan that goes on and sends him off. And Jake wins between both him and Ryan. And so we have everybody's like, yay, Jake won, woohoo! So we have the day after where Jake goes back to school and Ryan's like, and Jake is like, and I'm like, and the extras are all like, so that's like, we have these guys who seem to be like, okay, like, we're not gonna be friends, but hey, like, I accept that you beat me. We also could understand why Ryan was the way he was also by Ryan going on and having this kind of like barbecue or this grill party and whatever, and his dad ends up talking to Ryan and his friends is like, well, hey, like, why don't you share a beer with me, son? Like, come on. And we have Ryan that is telling his dad, it's like, hey, dad, like, shut up, like, cool down, like, nobody wants to drink with you. And so the dad is like, oh, like you think you're a tough guy now? Like, if you want to be the best, you need to beat the best. And so it's like, his dad is just really in Ryan's face. It's like, what are you going to do? Ryan does nothing, and his dad is like, oh, yeah, I thought so. And then he walks off. So you can really tell where Ryan gets his a-hole from, or his a-holeness from, his daddy. Because, of course, in all honesty, in a lot of bully-like movies, there's always this pattern of it always comes from like some mother or father, or just the fact that this guy is from not a good home. So really, when looking at it, you can like start to feel a little bit bad for Ryan, but like this guy won't stop anyways until someone will probably be dead. So maybe going on and finally taking this guy down a notch will finally even him out to just be like, okay, like, let's not be so aggressive. Let's try to go on and, like, have some real reasoning here. And so, with that said, I would have liked to have seen if they would have made a sequel to this movie with mostly the same actors, where it would have gone, what they would have done. And maybe they would have had a kind of more different story or interesting approaches. But I think once this movie like took off, quite a bit of these actors all took off to do other things for the most point. So yeah, like everything just worked out for everybody. So they all just could not go on and be in the sequel film. And they're like, hey man, we're going to film another one of these. They're just like, yeah, I think we filled our quota for getting beaten up in a film. So yeah, we're not going to come back for the sequel. So they're like, oh, okay, makes sense. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy. I realized I didn't get in the family stuff. And I just realized that. We had the one scene where Jake goes off to see Charlie uh, going on doing his tennis match, and Jake screams out to Charlie, it's like, well, hey man, like, what are you doing? I thought you wanted to go to Wimbledon. And Charlie's just like, because we have Jake who, like, talks to his mother. It's like, well, hey, like, so, like, how's he doing? And uh, Jake's mother turns to Jake. It's like, well, yeah, it seems like competition is pretty stiff here. And so that's when Jake gets up. It's like, hey, Wilburton. Charlie's like, all right. So, so Charlie kind of cheering him on, and we of course have Jake turning to his mother. Is like, well, like how like messed up are we? And it's like, yeah, we're really messed up. So we also had the point where Margaret goes on and tells like Jake, it's like, well, do you think you're the only one that's angry? Like, do you think you're the only one that wants to go on and throw stuff here? And so Margaret throws this plate, and then Charlie throws this plate, and then Margaret then realizes that it's like, well, like somebody has to clean that up. So I'll go on and I'll do that. So, uh, and then we also have the moment about the mouthpiece where Margaret tells Raqua about like, well, hey, like make sure like he doesn't get punched in the teeth because I don't have dental yet. And Raqua is like, well, here's a mouth guard. That's my dental plan. So, uh, so yeah, so I think that mostly covers most of the family scenes. I think. But let me know in the comments below if there's anything, any little details that I forgot about. But I'm going to get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy.